Hey guys, my name is Shai and this is Evermind Astro. This video is about Gemini rising, right? The Ascendant in Gemini, and I am always super excited to talk about Gemini anything because I'm a Gemini moon and this activates my Gemini. So if I start talking really fast in this video, that's the Gemini energy, right? I just start going nuts, and sometimes I know my Gemini moon can talk so fast that people can't even understand what I'm saying, but it's really hard to keep it back. So the first thing, obviously, about Gemini and Gemini rising, in this case in particular, is that Gemini interacts with the world. Gemini rising, because your rising sign, in my interpretation, is how you interact and interface with the world, especially with people. And in Gemini rising's case, there's a lot of talking to people. There's a lot of chattiness, right? Chatting. This is, of course, not the be-all, end-all of who you are, but this is a big part of how you interact with the world. You like to chat with people, right? You like to chat with people, even if, here's the thing, even if you are a massive introvert. I am a massive introvert, right? Even if you're a big introvert, and even if you don't really like to talk to people, there is still this element of chattiness in how you interact with the world. I mean, if you're a big introvert and maybe your social anxiety, right, this can all definitely still apply to a Gemini rising person, but you might find when you're really comfortable, and maybe this comes out on when you're online, right, like chatting to people or messaging things, right, you have this verbal ability and you understand the value of interacting with the world in a verbal way, right? You want to talk to people, maybe you talk to trees, right? There is definitely this chatty nature to Gemini rising. And I think this is a good opportunity for me to emphasize what I consider to be a massive misconception about the Gemini archetype in general. Because the Gemini, if you think of like the two masks, the two faces, and like, the symbol that is often used, right? Then people say that Gemini is two-faced, that Gemini presents one face to the world and holds one face back, and that the face that they present to the world is false, and that the face that they hide is their true face. And then, man, I've even heard people equate Geminis with like narcissists and stuff, and it's crazy. And this is a total misconception of what Gemini really is. Yes, okay, the two faces, this is how I see the two faces of Gemini. First of all, it's not just two, it's two faces on that symbol because, well, it's a symbol, right? To me, Gemini is actually it's a multitude. Gemini is the generation of ideas, the generation of personality, the generation of thoughts, right? The generation of characters. And it is like, really, if I were to give you a symbol for Gemini, it would be like splattering paint all over the wall. And there's just dots all over the whole wall, just splattered there. Just a splattering, chaotic mess of a bunch of dots, right? Those dots aren't necessarily connected. When you connect the dots, you get Aquarius. That's something else, right? But all of those different dots all over the place, right? So Gemini can be quite chaotic because it is this generation of a multitude of thoughts, this generation of a multitude of personalities. But that's the thing, is these personalities aren't fake, right? So, you might find yourself when you're talking to one person, chatty Gemini, right? You're being one way, right? Like maybe when you're talking to your grandparents, right? You're talking to them in a specific type of way because they're your grandparents, and they have certain social expectations and they use certain language, and maybe, they're from a different culture or from a different religion or something like that, and you kind of interact with them on that level, and that feels good and comfortable to you, and it's not fake, right? And then you go to your friends, and maybe now you're swearing a lot, and you're talking about pop culture, and you're interacting with your friends with whatever subculture they belong to, and that also feels right and normal to you. That is also you. And then you go to work, and now you're your business self. And now you're super professional, right? You're like super professional. You've got your power suit on, and you can talk shop and do all of the business lingo and be, do the handshaking and all of the socially appropriate stuff. You can do that too. This is what I mean. Gemini it has this like fluidity of self and fluidity of language that is second to none, right? This is what Gemini does. And all of these different things, other archetypes, other energies, other people might look at Gemini and go, well, you keep changing how you are. You're acting differently in different situations. That means you're fake. No, you're not being fake, okay? All of these things are you. All of these things are real. Maybe you sometimes might feel, you Gemini rising might sometimes feel even yourself. You might feel uncomfortable with this because you might feel that you're like, it's like you can't help it. It's almost like you're forced to adapt to this situation. You're forced to, like, it's like when you go to work, suddenly like you're like this professional version of yourself is like getting sucked out of you, or you go to your friends and it's like you kind of conform to how they are, and you might feel that you are sometimes like almost like this conformity is out of your control. But I would say like really really feel inwards on this, and is it really conformity, or are these different situations just drawing out different aspects of yourself, right? And how are all of these different aspects of yourself, how are they all real? How are they all authentic, even if they are so different? And how are they all really part of you? And how are they all really part of you? So I would say, because of this Gemini nature, right, to basically adapt it's not really adapting your identity, especially if you're like, unless you're a Gemini sun, right? But Gemini rising, it's you're adapting the way you interact with the world, and you're adapting the way you speak to people. One of the lessons that you might learn through life is how to avoid situations that draw out parts of yourself that you don't want to be dealing with, that you don't want, right? So, I mean, this might play out more when you're younger, right? Like in high school, if you were to fall in with kind of, a tough crowd, right? Like falling in with kind of kids who are getting into trouble, like stealing cars, breaking into houses and stuff like that, or like doing drugs and stuff. You might find yourself like interacting with them, right, on their level. And they're kind of drawing out the part of you that is wild, that is untamed, that is a rebel. And you might end up going, wait, this isn't like good for me. This isn't the path I want to go down. So for Gemini rising, it's really important to actually know who to cut off, who to cut out, because your environment draws things out of you. Does that make sense? Your environment draws things out of you, especially the people, right? Especially the people. So other rising signs would be more capable of like hanging out with, like, I don't know, hanging out at a party house where everyone's doing drugs, and like like hard drugs, right? Drugs that you really like, you don't want to do even once, right? Those kind of drugs, right? Some rising signs could go hang out, have fun, party with everybody, and like stay sober all night, and that would be fine. Gemini rising would it would be easier for Gemini rising, depending on your sun and moon sign, right? But it would be easier for Gemini rising to kind of fall into that energy. So it would be more important for Gemini rising, I would say, in general, for many of you, to like not go to that kind of party, to kind of stay away from those kind of people, because they pull that out of you, right? They pull that out of you. So a big lesson with Gemini rising is to, for your own good and for the kind of curation of your own life, really pay attention to who you are with, to who you spend your time with, because it's not exactly that you're a chameleon, and it's not exactly, you're certainly not being fake, and it's not exactly that you're conforming to them. It's that you match their energy, right? There is something inside of you that can match that person's energy, and that person's energy, and that person's energy, and that person's energy. And all of it is part of you, and all of it is real, and all of it can certainly be authentic parts of you. But you have to ask yourself, do you want to be like that person? Do you want to be in that environment? Is that healthy for you? Does that draw out parts of you that you want to be drawn out? Does that make sense? So, because like I'm noticing, I mean, this is only the third rising video I've been doing, but as I'm talking through these, it's like these little lessons are coming up, right? These little lessons are coming up, which I didn't actually expect, but I find that we all can learn to modulate our rising energy, right? Because the rising sign is how we bump up against the world, and eventually get kind of sick of bumping up against things, and we eventually can choose to modulate how we interact with the world if we so desire, right? And for you guys, it's not so much changing how you interact with the world, it's changing what part of the world you interact with, right? Changing what part of the world you interact with, changing who you interact with. And just, always with the Gemini energy, guys, don't let all of this, I don't know why Gemini gets so much hate. It's really weird. It's really weird. I think it's because other people don't, if you don't have any Gemini energy, right? Other people don't seem to understand that you can be many, many things, right? And that, you can be one version of yourself at home, one version of yourself at work, one version of yourself with your friends, one version of yourself with your grandparents, and one version of yourself again in some other situation. You can be all of these things, and they're all real, they're all authentic, right? It's not about hiding some dark, bad part of yourself and presenting a better face. It's not that at all. It's like changing your clothes, right? It's like changing your clothes. Like, how many clothes do you have in the closet? It's not like you're hiding your bad, ugly clothes in the closet and only wearing your good clothes, right? You could have a closet full of nice clothes, and every day you pick a different shirt to wear, and that changes how you present yourself to the world. So your Gemini rising energy is like that, right? You're presenting different shirts to the world. But with Gemini, of course, a lot of this comes out in terms of how you speak, right? How you talk. Chatting to people. And I would also say a lot of people think that Gemini energy is like superficial. And I mean, it can be, but that's just because Gemini will think and talk about literally anything. Like Gemini energy, yeah, it can think and talk about, what the celebrities are doing, reading like trashy magazines, or can talk about hair and makeup, can talk about the weather, can talk about archaeology and, ancient history and philosophy. And Gemini will talk and think about literally anything. And so other people can look at a Gemini rising person and going, oh, that person's over there like talking about something I think is really superficial. And then they'll assume that Gemini rising person is really superficial. That's not true at all. It just happens that that's what Gemini rising was thinking and talking about at that moment, right? In some other moment, Gemini rising could be thinking and talking about something else entirely. It just depends about who the Gemini rising person is interacting with and what topic has been presented to them. Because to Gemini rising, you could find yourself just like willing to talk to anybody, right? Because, or willing to think about anything, right? If you're really not a people person, like Gemini rising does not require you to be an outgoing people person extrovert. So if you're way, way, way more introverted, all of this stuff about talking, it can be replaced by thinking. Because with Gemini, there is this, it's like, what's the difference between talking and thinking? With Gemini rising, your inner monologue can come out, right? Can just be out there. And you might really find it good for yourself to talk things out, talking it out with someone or just writing it down. It's like there's a whole thing with language with Gemini, right? With language and verbal ability and linguistic fluidity, right? Some people I notice use the same type of sentences like all the time, and the same type of, it's like they almost have like a bag in their brain full of sentences and they use the same sentences all the time. Gemini rising, I mean, you could be a poet, right? Especially if you have like some Pisces in there as well, like Gemini and Pisces, that makes a poet. With Gemini, you're constantly mixing up how you use your language, right? And you could, even if you only speak one language, like maybe some of you speak many languages, but even if you only speak one language, you could speak many different like versions of that language, right? Just like the one that you speak to your grandparents, the one you speak at work, the one you speak to your friends, right? Those are all almost different, like not quite a different dialect, but sort of, right? Like a different sub-dialect, or I don't know what you would call it, but different ways of talking, right? Different ways of talking. So, Gemini rising, don't let anybody tell you that you are superficial or that you are fake, because neither of those things are true. I don't know. I'll never understand, guys, why Gemini gets so much hate. It's weird. I love Gemini. It's amazing. Thank you, all of you, for being your beautiful Gemini selves and for presenting your beautiful Gemini selves to the world through your ascendant sign. So that's what I want to say about Gemini rising. You guys can check me out. All of my links down in the description box. I have a website, an Etsy shop, a newsletter for those of you who want bi-monthly astrology updates. I talk about the transits and some of the bigger shifts that are going on. I do tarot readings, also doing astrology readings with tarot cards. I have another channel, all that stuff. It's all in the big pile of links down there. So sending you guys so much love and light. I'll talk to you later. Bye.